Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Matthew Shiner podcast. Saturday we celebrated the 10th anniversary of Laudato Si, and today's the 26th, so 2 days later. It's the 10th anniversary of Laudato Si, which was the letter of Pope Francis on care for our common home. And so we're going to be looking through this on the 10th anniversary. We're not going to be reading through all of it. Instead, I'm going to be looking at this summary from EWTN. So this is a summary of Laudato Si. They don't give you an author. It's a summary of Laudato Si. So this is from L'Osservatore Romano. I believe that is Italian. I don't want to mispronounce it. A summary of Pope Francis's encyclical on care for our common home. The encyclical takes its name from the invocation of St. Francis of Assisi, "Praise be to you, my Lord," which in the Canticle of the Creatures reminds us that the earth, our common home, is like a sister with whom we share our life and a beautiful mother who opens her arms to embrace us. If you remember a while back, I did the episode Be the Change, and I said how that would kind of relate back to Laudato Si, and it did, and I kind of did, and I read the beginning of Laudato Si. But this video is exclusively going to look at Laudato Si. We ourselves are dust of the earth. Our very bodies are made of her elements. We breathe the air, and we receive life and refreshment from her waters. Pope Francis chose his name from St. Francis of Assisi, and by choosing this, he chose to share his care for the lowly, for the same people who St. Francis showed his care for. St. Francis, of course, who had great care and love for the lepers, but also for animals and creatures of his time, and especially for the earth around him, as we see, "Praise be to you, my Lord," in the Canticle of the Creatures. This sister now cries out to us because of the harm we have inflicted on her by our irresponsible use and abuse of the goods with which God has endowed her. Her cry, united with that of the poor, stirs our conscience to acknowledge our sins against creation. Taking the words of the beloved ecumenical patriarch Bartholomew, the Pope reminds us, for human beings to destroy the biological diversity by causing change in its climates, to contaminate the earth's waters and its lands, its airs, and its life. These are sins. And so we kind of see how Pope Francis points out the lack of care for creation we have had, the lack of concern, and especially our lack and irresponsibility of using of Earth's resources. And so the appropriate response to such penitence is what St. John Paul II already called a global ecological conversion. In this, St. Francis of Assisi is example par excellence of care for the vulnerable and of an integral ecology lived out joyfully and authentically. He shows us just how inseparable is the bond between concern for nature, justice for the poor, commitment to society, and interior peace. So we see that it is important to care for our environment on a very, very, very low level. Besides, this is God's earth. God has given us this earth. We should care for it. We should also care for the common home we have and for the next generation. Laudato Si is developed around the concept of integral ecology as a paradigm able to articulate the fundamental relationships of the person with God, with oneself, with other human beings, with creation. As I said in the Laudato Si, it is looking, as I said in Be the Change, we have to understand that we need to look at ourselves, and then look at the problems around the world, be able to solve those, and that's with our human beings, with all of creation, with our community, our small communities, our homes, our neighborhoods, our cities, our states, our countries, and finally with the entire world. The Pope himself explains this movement starts by listening spiritually to the results of the best scientific research on environmental matters available today, letting them, quote, touch us deeply and provide a concrete foundation for the ethical and spiritual itinerary that follows. Science is the best tool by which we can listen to the cry of the earth. Of course, science, in a simple level, is the study of creation. That is what science is. So it's the study of creation, the study of the earth, and by studying the earth, we listen to her cry. The objective is to develop an integral ecological profile, which in its various dimensions includes our, quote, unique place as human beings in the world and our relationship to its surroundings. As we see, we are humans. We're supposed to care for this earth. So let's see. At the heart of Laudato Si, we find this question: what kind of world do we want to leave to those who come after us, to children who are now growing up? As I said, that's kind of what we have to look at. How are we going to leave this world for the next generation, and the next generation, and the next generation? And how are we going to leave a legacy that will help the next generation, and the next generation, so on and so forth? Pope Francis continues, this question does not have to do with the environment alone and in isolation. The issue cannot just be that's a typo, approached piecemeal. That looks like a typo. This leads us to ask ourselves about the meaning of existence and its value at the base of social life. What is the purpose of our life in this world? Why are we here? What is the goal of our work and all our efforts? What need does the earth have of us? Unless we struggle with these deeper questions, says the Pope, I do not believe that our concern for ecology will produce significant results. It is clear that, Laudato Si, the examination of conscience, the instrument that the Church has always recommended to orient one's life by reflection on one's lived relationship with the Lord, should include a new dimension. One would regularly review not only how one has lived in community with God, with others, and with oneself, but also with all creatures in nature. So, again, have care for our common home. We should treat the earth with our best. So, what is happening to our common home? The chapter presents recent scientific findings on the environment as a way of listening to the cry of creation, to become painfully aware, to dare to turn what is happening to the world to our own personal sufferings, and thus to discover what each of us can do about it. It thus deals with several aspects of the present ecological crisis. So obviously, what are these issues? What are the issues that we have to look at in the world? So here we go. Here is 7. Pollution and climate change. Obviously, that's a big one. Pollution, waste, and throwaway culture. That is a big thing. Culture is a big thing that we can talk about. And climate as a common good. I think pollution is one of the biggest things that we should look at, especially in regards to, as it says, throwaway culture. We're so easy to just grab one thing, keep it for a couple, and then just throw it away. Pick and choose, and when it doesn't suit us anymore, we just throw it away. And certainly that sort of goes with our consumerist society of buy and sell. On the one hand, repurposing recycling, that is, selling something, donating something, that sort of helps, but when we're just constantly buying and then just throwing away, for lack of a better term, that's the other thing. The issue of water, I'll look at the description down there. Loss of biodiversity, decline in the quality of human life and breakdown of society, global inequality, weak responses, a variety of opinions. So, of course, pollution we talked about, climate as a common good. Climate change is a global problem with serious implications, environmental, social, economical, political, and for the distribution of good. Climate change affects the entire population and are among the cause of migration movements, but many of those who possess more resources and economic or political power seem mostly to be concerned with masking the problems or concealing their symptoms. At the same time, a lack of response to these tragedy involving our brothers and sisters points to the loss of the sense of responsibility for our fellow men and women upon which all civil society is founded. To preserve climate, quote, represents one of the principal challenges facing humanity in our days, end quote. So the Pope, as I said, climate change is this big thing. It's one of the biggest concerns that a lot of people have. As I mentioned in the Be the Change episode, that was a whole episode in the show. So climate is this forefront issue. This should be what we are thinking. This should be the big issue that we should be discussing and trying to not only prevent, but also reverse if we can. And so water, it's not just the issue of there's not enough water for everyone. It's an issue of there is not good water. People are dying because there's bad water. They're getting sick because there is not good water. So Pope Francis says, access to safe drinkable water is a basic and universal human right. I don't think there's much argument that we can make to that, so I'm going to leave it there. The issue of water. It's an issue in a lot of places. It's an issue that we have to solve because, as Pope Francis says, it's a human right. Loss of biodiversity, the extinction of plants and animals, of course. That's a big thing too. Each year sees the disappearance of thousands of plants and animal species which we will never know, which our children will never see because they have been lost forever. Diverse species are not just an exploitable resource, they have a value in and of themselves, which is not in function of human beings. All creatures are connected, for all of us as living creatures are dependent on one another. Of course, you've all learned about food pyramids in your school classes, food chains in your school classes. I don't need to explain about how, even the simplest of creatures, one creature needs another creature, needs another creature, needs another creature, all those down the line. So it is sort of important in many ways that We do have these animals. We do have the biodiversity, not only in the food pyramids, but many different reasons towards that. Of course, that's science things. Decline in the quality of human life and breakdown of society. I don't think that needs to be explained much. That the growth of the past 2 centuries has not always led to an integral development, and many stages are huge, insufficient structures, exclusively wasteful of energy and water. Becoming unlivable from a health point of view, while contact with nature is limited, except for areas reserved for a privileged few. Again, the decline of human quality of living, not necessarily cost of living, not necessarily anything like that, but the actual places where people live. Global inequality. The deterioration of the environment and of society affects the most vulnerable people on the planet. That goes back to also water. That goes back also to climate change. And then that all leads back to one big thing, which is weak responses. We've been terrible in the way that we've responded to this. We needed to go better. Of course, that goes back global inequality. There's places where there aren't people who will get the right amount of resources, or we're pushing our resources more towards this than this. And so that is a part of weak responses. We're putting our money, we're putting our study, we're putting everything into the wrong area. The gospel of creation, the light offered by faith, the mystery of the universe, the message of each creature in the harmony of creation, a universal communion, the common destination of goods, and the gaze of Jesus. The complexity of ecological crisis calls for the multicultural and multidisciplinary dialogue that includes spirituality and religion. Faith offers ample motivations to care for the nature and for the most vulnerable of their brothers and sisters. Responsibility for nature is part of the Christian faith. As I said, God made this world. We should care for it. We should care for the people. Wisdom of the biblical accounts, the Bible, God who liberates and saves is the same God who created the universe, and these two divine ways of acting are intimately and inseparably connected. The story of creation is key for reflecting on the relationship between human beings and other creatures, and how sin breaks the equilibrium of creation and its entirety. These accounts suggest that human life is grounded in 3 fundamental and closely intertwined relationships with God, with neighbor, and with the earth itself. According to the Bible, these 3 vital relationships have been broken both outwardly and within us, the rupture of sin. Obviously, that goes back to Adam and Eve. When Adam and Eve lost these 3 fundamental connections between their inner selves and between their, of course, Adam lost connection with Eve, in that way, that true fundamental happiness that God offered them, and they lost a sort of happiness in themselves, but that also involves they lost that relationship with God, and then finally, they lost that relationship with Earth itself. Earth, the creatures would become hostile, all that, they'd have to so the point is, we learn that sin is the rupture between that. Earth is a gift, not a possession. It was given to us to administer, not to destroy. We must respect the laws of nature, as all of creation has its own goodness. So we must understand that the Bible teaches us that we need to care for the world, and that we are called to have a communion with God, ourselves, and the earth. Creation and the mystery of the universe. Creation can only be understood as a gift from the outstretched hand of the Father of all of us. We can descend from creative things to the greatness of God and His loving mercy. The mystery of the universe, all creation in the risen Christ, continues onward until the fullness of God. In this universal communion, the human being gifted with intelligence and personal identity represents the uniqueness. Human beings are responsible for the creation entrusted to their care, and the freedom is a mystery that can promote development or cause degradation. The message of each creature in the harmony of unity, in the harmony of all creation. Each creature has its own purpose, none is superfluous. Superfluous. I can't speak. The entire material universe speaks of God's love. We can say that alongside revelation, properly so called, contained in sacred scripture, there is a divine manifestation in the blaze of the sun and the fall of the night. Throughout the universe and its complementarity, the inexhaustible richness of God is expressed. It is His presence, and it invites us to adoration. A universal communion, called into being by one Father, all of us are linked by unseen bonds, and together we form a universal family. This continues back, the mystery of the universe, the message of each creature, and a universal communion, and the common destination of all goods, and the gaze of Jesus. All things are rooted back in God. All things are rooted back in a common communion a common union between all things. We're called back to seek God, and we're called to have that relationship with God, but also of all those things within that. So if we want to have communion with God, we also have to have communion with the people who also seek communion with God. We have to have communion with the universe, God's creation. We have to have communion with God's people. And then we finally have to have that communion with God. We have to have the common communion between all three of those. The human roots of the ecological crisis, technology, globalization, and the crisis and effects of modern anthropocentrism. There we go. Technology, creativity, and power. It's right to appreciate and recognize the benefits of technology for its contribution to sustainable development, but technology gives those with the knowledge, and especially the economic resources to use them, an impressive dominance over the whole of humanity in the entire world. Humanity needs a sound ethics, a culture, and spirituality genuinely capable of seeing limits and teaching clear-minded self-restraint. And with technology, Pope Leo has already started warning against AI, and he has only been not even a month into his pontificate, and he's already been warning us about AI. The globalization, of course, and with all this, we understand that there is an issue with our world and the way we've been treating our world, especially in regards to technology and advancements in the world. While advancements are great, yes, there have been some unfortunate developments along the way. Integral ecology, environmental, economic, and social ecology, cultural ecology, ecology of daily life, the principle of common good, and justice between the generations. Everything is connected: time, space, physical, chemical, and biological components of the world from a network that we can never fully understand. Fragmented and isolated knowledge must be integrated into a broader vision that considers a, quote, interrelational between ecosystems and between the various spheres of social interaction, and also involves the institutional level, because the health of society's institutions affects the environment and the quality of human life. So, back to this, we understand that we need to care for the environment. Again, I didn't script this video, so pardon me for that. We must understand the care for the environment in regards to our economy and our social, as well as cultural, daily life, the common good. I think the common good is the biggest thing. We must care for everyone. We can't just think about what will help benefit us. We have to care what will benefit every single person in the world. We must avoid injustice. We must avoid making sure that it only benefits a select number of people. It has to care for the common, for every human. So justice between generations. We can no longer speak of sustainable development apart from intergenerational solidarity, without, however, forgetting the poor of today whose life on this earth is brief and who cannot keep on waiting. Lines of approach and action. Dialogue is a big thing. Dialogue on the environment in the international community. Dialogue for new national and local policies. Dialogue and transparency in decision making, and politics and economy in dialogue for human fulfillment, and religions in dialogue of science. I think the biggest thing is dialogue. I think the biggest thing is starting, talking, and doing things about this. Putting in a plan within our communities, within our neighborhoods, within our schools, within our cities, within our states, and within our countries, and these will all help to form national plans and so on. And so this last section, ecological education and spirituality towards a new lifestyle, educating for, I don't feel bad about all my mistakes because I've noticed at least 2 spelling mistakes in here. Educating for the covenant between humanity and the environment, ecological conversion, joy and peace, civic and political love, sacramental signs and the celebration of rest, the Trinity and relationships between creatures, queen of all creation, and beyond the sun. And so I think the biggest parts of this is education and spirituality, teaching people how we're going to do this, how this sort of relates back to spirituality, our care for the common home, our care for creation, our care for our God, and how we should achieve unity with creation. And of course this can go into a very heretical view of we need to be one with creation. that's not what we're saying. We need to have a union with creation. We don't need to be one with creation. We need communion with God, and we also need to understand that with communion with God comes the need for a communion with our entire human community, as well as the earth upon which we rest. And so that education of what is the world, how are we going to better our world, I think that's what needs to be done, and especially in regards to spirituality. Not necessarily spirituality in regards to heretical spirituality, but in regards to spirituality of understanding a union between us and the earth and God. So that's it for today. I hope I gave a good look at Laudato Si. Again, in the future, I do plan on scripting videos again and going back to that. But again, I'm glad to be able to be doing the screen recording, looking at articles and stuff like this. But again, back to scripting at some point. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you on Thursday.